So in this video, let's talk about how to make a winning junior high school English speech. So the junior high school English speech contest is a big deal. If your student wins the local contest, it goes in the school newspaper and it's announced to the parents and the staff. And if your student happens to make it through the prefectural contest and go on to the national finals in Tokyo, the school may do something like printing out a big banner to put in front of the school with the student's name on it sometimes, or at least they used to do that back in the day before privacy became such an issue. But my point is that, yeah, the English speech contest is a big, fat, hairy deal. It's also a good chance for the ALT to shine, because very often the Japanese English teachers will just throw it to the ALT and say, okay, just practice with the student, make him win. Now, there are actually two different speech contests held kind of in parallel. There's the recitation, or ansho contest, and the speech, or bengdon, which I find hard to say, bengdon contest. The recitation contest is just that. The student memorizes and then recites some passage from the textbook or somewhere else, where in the speech contest, the student writes their own speech and, of course, memorizes it and presents it. There are a couple of important differences. First, the recitation contest is more popular with the younger students, first and second year, although third year do it as well. And the speech contest is more popular with the older students, second and third year, and although you'll get the occasional first year student in there too. But the biggest difference is that the recitation contest ends at the prefectural level. You can win at the prefectural contest, you can get a nice plaque, and you go home. It doesn't continue on to the national finals. The speech contest does, however, lead on to the national level. And if you place in the prefectural contest and get to go on to the nationals, you can go to the Prince Takamado Cup, or the Takamado no Miyahai, which is a big, fat, hairy deal again. It's 3 days and 2 nights of speech fun up in Tokyo, or down in Tokyo, depending on where you live. And even if you lose in the first rounds, which you will because the competition is incredibly fierce, these are terrific kids, you still get to stay through the end, and everybody, winners and losers, attends the commemorative reception held on the second night. That's like a very formal light dinner at the Imperial Hotel, or the Teikoku Hoteru, attended by all the participants and their teachers and their parents, and also by dignitaries, if memory serves. For example, the Canadian ambassador and a member of the Japanese royal family attends as well. So the school will be tickled pink if you can help your student to get to the national finals, and your stock will rise. And this is just a great opportunity for you, the ALT, to shine. So in this video, I want to focus more on the speech contest rather than the recitation contest, because that's where the real rewards lie. Specifically, I want to talk about the 4 characteristics, as I see them, of a winning speech. Note that we're talking about the speech content itself, writing the speech, the kind of content that winning speeches tend to share. And at this stage, at least, we're not talking about things like pronunciation and gestures. This is about writing the content of the speech itself. So with that said, here are the 4 characteristics of a winning speech. So the first characteristic of a winning speech is that there's a clear story arc. It goes without saying that the student should make a speech about him or herself. Now, this may not be quite so true with high school or university students, older students who may be expected to talk about more important topics sort of in the abstract. But when it comes to junior high school students, the student should speak about themselves, and they should have a clear story arc with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you'll hear speeches at the local level particularly that go something like this. I joined the student council at my school, and we planned the school festival, and we didn't always agree, but we discussed, and we reached an agreement, and our school festival was a success. Thank you for listening. Now, I will admit that my heart is a stone-cold lump of coal that died in my chest decades ago. I am an unfeeling SOB, but we would all have to admit that a speech like that is simply uncompelling and uninteresting. Any speech worth listening to should have a clear story to it, with something approaching a climax, a conclusion, and ideally a kisho tenketsu. Now that's a Japanese term for a particular type of story arc which is common in stories across cultures. I'm going to wave my hands at what the individual kanji there mean, just because this is not a Japanese lesson. You can look it up. But by way of example, let's look at this cartoon. So in the first panel, you see the story begins. We're introduced to the characters and their motivations. And in the second panel, the story proceeds apace. We get exactly what we would expect given the first panel. There's nothing surprising in that second panel. It's in the third panel where we get the ten of Kisho Tenketsu, which actually means korogaru, or it's kaitensu no ten, and it means to turn over, to be flipped over. In any case, this is where we get the twist, the surprise, the unexpected, some shocking turn of events. This is the "No, I am your father" moment from Empire Strikes Back, from a little movie called Star Wars. Anybody? Anybody? Or this is Vader throwing Palpatine down the shaft in Return of the Jedi. If you've seen the movie The Sixth Sense, then you know what I'm talking about the twist. If you think about it, almost every story, every movie certainly, has some sort of a twist or surprise at the end. And that's what we need to be including in the student's speech. Note that students left to their own devices will almost never write stories like this. It's up to you as editor, as teacher, to talk with your student, to discuss it, sit down with them, and to sort of massage the student's story into this pattern. So yeah, a story arc with a clear conclusion, a climax, and if you can swing it, sort of a Kisho Tenketsu, weave in the surprise somewhere toward the end. So the second characteristic of a winning speech is that it's going to be amusing/entertaining. Why do I say that? Look at these two audiences. Now, let's say that these are both audiences listening to speeches. Which audience do you think is enjoying the speech more? Which audience would you rather be a member of? Clearly, the audience on the right is having a better time. Now, students will tend to try and get on their soapbox and lecture the audience seriously about the environment or global warming or their grandfather who died of cancer but was a real character, right, in life. None of these topics are disqualifying per se, although none of these would be my first choice. But audiences don't like to be lectured or condescended to or told what's what by a 12-year-old, 12, 13, 14-year-old. So the student goes off on the environment, for example, and they imagine the audience listening and saying, "Oh, the environment's important? What's this global what? I'm sorry, what? Can you spell that for me?" Again, high school and university students or even adults making a speech like this might get away with this sort of weighty, abstract topic. But with junior high school students, you need to be very careful because the audiences don't like to be talked down to by a 12, 13, 14-year-old student. There's a gag reflex. And if your student can make a speech that is genuinely amusing, then it's like somebody opened a window in that auditorium and let in a rose-scented breeze. It's remarkably refreshing because most of the speeches in these junior high school speech contests tend to be very self-important and deadly serious, and that does not make for an entertaining speech. So yeah, keep it amusing and entertaining and even a bit lighthearted. So the third characteristic of a winning speech, I would argue, is that it is self-deprecating. So look at this picture here. You all know who this is, of course. Say it with me. Monkey D. Luffy. Captain of his little pirate ship in the cartoon One Piece, of course. Let's examine for a moment what makes this character compelling. In every objective sense, Luffy is a manifestly bad captain of his little ship. He is over-optimistic, over-confident, over-enthused, over-trusting. He's generally not the brightest bulb on the tree. But if we swapped out Luffy for a stately, professional, seasoned Navy captain standing on the ship's bridge in his dress-white uniform, calmly giving reasonable, thoughtful commands, a better captain by any standard, nobody would watch. We watch because Luffy and his crew, his friends, they are over the top. We watch precisely because they're over the top. Now, I'm not suggesting that your student portray him or herself as wildly over the top as Luffy. No, far from it. But just a touch of overconfidence, over-enthusiasm, over-optimism, over something, choose your adjective, makes the character much more reliable. And that bit of character flaw, if you will, can drive the story forward. It certainly makes the speech much more amusing, which is what we talked about in the previous section, and it gives the student a chance to grow, to show some growth at the end of the speech, to come to the end and say, gee, maybe I was a little bit too confident, trusting, choose your adjective. And that character flaw, if you will, can contribute to the twist or turn in the story that we talked about in the first tip. So the fourth characteristic of a winning speech is that it's truthy. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that in helping our students write the speech, we all struggle as teachers with just how much to help the student. I think we can all agree that we should not simply step in and write the speech for the student. But should we leave it to the student entirely? Should we give any suggestions at all? How much editing by the teacher, right, or the ALT is warranted? how much is permitted. So take a look at this photo, which some of you may remember from several years ago when a flight out of LaGuardia Airport in New York suffered dual engine failure. And the pilot, whose name was Captain Sully Sullenberger, made the bold decision, because he wasn't able to return to the airport, he made the decision to ditch the airplane in the Hudson River. Miraculously, everybody survived. So, of course, it was very dramatic, and of course, they made a movie about it, and of course, it starred Tom Hanks as the pilot. And in planning the movie, in talking with the pilot, with Captain Sully, to try and get his permission to make the movie, Tom Hanks allegedly told him this. And I can't vouch for this, I can't promise you whether it's true or not, but what I read is that he said this: "I'm going to say some things you didn't say, I'm going to do some things you didn't do. Other than that, let's make it as accurate as possible." And I would argue that you should take a similar attitude when it comes to writing and editing your student's speech. Yes, the speech should be true. It should be at a minimum based on a true story, but reimagining events that actually happened to make them clearer to the audience, I would argue, is justified. Let's bring it back to me. Here's how I handled a speech a couple of years ago, junior high school English speech. My student, who was participating in the contest, was on the track team, and we decided to talk about that. He was this really tall, lanky kid. He looked like a gazelle. He was amazing. And at my request, we started by, I asked him to write, like 10 pages, just whatever he felt like. And he wrote 10 or more pages, and he wrote about his father who helped him, and his friends and his coach, and a couple of other members on the track team with whom he was friends, but shared a good-natured rivalry. And I heard that and I thought, oh yeah, that's it. So together we decided that that was the angle to take, the rivalry. We ended up leaving his coach and his father completely out of the speech and focusing on these sort of friends/rivals. And in the speech, we only actually talked about one of the two other friends of his/rivals, because although there were 3 of them total, in actuality, and they were good friends and they'd hang out together and like that, we downplayed the friendship and upplayed, that's not a thing. We stressed, we emphasized the rivalry between them. Now, we weren't lying, okay, but listening to the speech, you'd be forgiven for thinking that there was only a single other rival of my student rather than 2. And if we're not realizing that they were actually pretty good friends. And we talked about how my student was at first not quite as fast as these other friends of his, but that he was training really hard and gradually trying to catch up with them. In the speech, we put numbers on this. My student says at one point that he lost in one race by 8 seconds, and then in the next race he lost by 5, and then by 3, and then they were neck and neck. The trend we were describing in the speech was true. He was getting faster and faster and narrowing the gap between these other students, or actually one other student in the speech anyway. But those numbers themselves were completely made up. It wasn't 8 and 5 and 3. My student couldn't remember exactly how many students he'd lost by. He only knew that it was smaller and smaller. That gap was smaller and smaller as time went on. So we were justified, I would say, in making up, or rather I should ask a question, were we justified in making those numbers up? I would argue that in broad strokes, it was a little editorial license, and that, yeah, we were making the actual fact of his gaining on these friends who were his rivals, making it clearer and more comprehensible to the audience. So, as I see it, those are the 4 characteristics of a winning junior high school speech, English speech. So, at the end of the day, I'd argue that if your student writes a speech that is a story about the student, him or herself, ideally with a climax or a conclusion to it, and some sort of a twist, a turn, the unexpected happens somewhere toward the end of the speech, that kisho tenketsu thing. If it's entertaining and or amusing, funny if you can swing it, but entertaining, amusing at a minimum. If it's self-deprecating and the student doesn't put themselves up on a pedestal. And finally, if it's truthy, okay, true or truthy, then you are well on your way to making a very good speech that may get you on to the national finals. And I wish good luck to all of you. And thank you very much for watching. As usual, I do read the comments and I do comment and answer questions and like that, take suggestions like that in the comments. I don't give a rat's ass if you like or subscribe, but I always enjoy making these videos and I want to thank you very much for watching. All right. And by the way, preview of coming attractions. My next video is going to be 10 concrete tips and tricks, concrete things you can do to an already existing speech to add some spice to it. So look forward to that. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy.